Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I am Dr. Saeed Akbar Tariq, Assistant Professor Forensic Medicine. Today, the topic of my lecture is autopsy incisions, how to open the body cavities when we are conducting autopsy. I will tell you how to open skull cavity, chest cavity, and abdominal cavity, and how we will examine the various viscera. There are 4 types of incisions which we use to complete the autopsy. Primary autopsy incisions, secondary autopsy incisions, tertiary autopsy incisions, and quaternary autopsy incisions. Primary autopsy incisions. These are the incisions which are used on the skin to incise the skin. Those incisions which we use to incise the skin are known as primary autopsy incisions. For example, for opening the skull, we use this from mastoid to mastoid scalp incision, or in case of trunk, I incision, Y incision, and modified Y incision. These are all primary incisions. Those incisions in which we incise the skin or scalp. Then secondary autopsy incisions. Secondary autopsy incisions are the incisions in which we cut bones to expose the cavities. For example, in case of cranial cavity, sawing of the skull or cutting of the sternal plate to open the thoracic cavity. So these incisions are known as secondary autopsy incisions. In secondary autopsy incision, we incise the bones. Then the third type of incision which we used during autopsy, that is tertiary autopsy incisions. Tertiary autopsy incisions are the incisions when we incise the membranes, serous membranes. For example, cutting of the meninges to examine the brain, cutting of the pleura to examine the chest cavity, and cutting of the peritoneum to examine the abdominal contents. So these incisions are known as tertiary autopsy incisions. Then there is a quaternary autopsy incisions. These are the incisions which we use to expose the organs, to expose the chamber of the heart, to expose the inner side of the lungs, to examine the stomach, to examine the liver, and those incisions are known as quaternary autopsy incisions. So now, first of all, we will discuss primary autopsy incisions. There are mainly 3 types of incisions: I-shaped incision, Y-shaped incision, and modified Y-shaped incision. I-shaped incision, which is also known as straight incision, they extend from chin to the pubic symphysis, avoiding the umbilicus. Because it resembles eye, so it's known as I-shaped incision. The second incision is, which may be used, is Y-shaped incision. Y-shaped incisions extends obliquely down from point just in front of the base of each ear to meet in the midline at the suprasternal notch. Then it follows the course of the straight incision. So each limb of the Y starts from base of the each ear, and both limbs of this Y, then they join the suprasternal notch, and then it will adopt the pathway of eye incision. That is up to the pubic symphysis, avoiding the umbilicus. The third primary incision which we use to conduct the autopsy is modified Y incision. Modified Y incision is we use in case of females for cosmetic reasons. It begins at a point near the acromial end of the clavicle and extends in a curve either above the nipple or below the nipple on each side at a point above or below the Ziegfeld process of sternum. This incision is used in females to avoid the mutilation of breasts. So you can see Y and modified Y shaped incision. So you can see all the three primary incisions: I incision, Y-shaped incision, and modified Y-shaped incision. I-shaped incision starting from chin to the pubic symphysis, avoiding the umbilicus, and in this picture it is clear by A. Then B is the Y-shaped incision. Both limb of the Y starts from base of the ears, then these both limbs join the suprasternal notch, and then it adopts the pathway of I incision. Then modified Y incision, you can see it is C, acromial end of the clavicle. They start from acromial end of the clavicle, then they join the Ziegfeld process of the sternum, and then it adopts the pathway of I incision. So now we will discuss how we have to open the body cavities. First of all, head. For the examination of the skull cavity, the neck is extended by placing a wooden block under the shoulders. We can use wooden block, cement block, rubber block, anything. Then we fix the head using a headrest. An intermastoid incision is made from one mastoid process behind one ear to the vertex and again to the mastoid process of the other ear. That is intermastoid incision. After this intermastoid incision, the skin flaps are reflected. The anterior flap is reflected anteriorly, while the posterior flaps are reflected posteriorly. The anterior flaps are reflected forward up to superciliary ridges, and the posterior flaps are reflected posteriorly up to occipital protuberance. After that, with the help of the saw, a V-shaped cut is made so that the skull fits back correctly after autopsy. This V-shaped cut passes through, we start from the center of the forehead, then from center of the forehead to the base of the mastoid process, and from mastoid process posteriorly to the occipital protuberance. and then again on the other side of the Maestad process, and back we will come back to our starting point, that is center of the forehead. You will see this is particularly, you can see in just like a B. It is just like V shape. So after removing the calvaria or skull bone, dura is incised along the lines of the incision of the skull, folded to the midline. Falx cerebri is freed from the cribriform plate, and then dura is pulled back. 4 fingers of the left hand are inserted into the frontal lobe, and the nerves and vessels are cut. Tentorium is also cut along the posterior part of the petrous bone. A knife is then inserted into the occipital foramen and the cervical cord. Cervical nerves and vertebral arteries are cut as far as possible. With the right hand, the cerebellum is grasped and examined. Any sign of hemorrhage, injury, or any other disease should be carefully observed. Vessels, especially the circle of Willis, should be checked for any arteriosclerosis or aneurysm